So good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Niamh Dunphy, and I'm delighted to chair tonight's webinar, New Entrants in Farming, Pathways, Policies and Possibilities in Ireland and the UK. This event is being jointly hosted by the Irish National Chapter and the UK National Chapter of the World Food Forum. And we are delighted to bring together speakers and participants from across Ireland and the UK to discuss one of the most important issues facing the future of agriculture, supporting the next generation of farmers. Before we begin, just some housekeeping points. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded, and throughout the event, please feel free to submit your questions by putting them into chat. We'll be collecting questions throughout the evening, and we will address as many as possible. And we'll also have a Q&A at the end, so please don't hesitate to put in your questions as they come to mind, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So for those who may be unfamiliar with the World Food Forum national chapters, both the Irish and UK chapters work to bring young people together around issues relating to food systems, agriculture, sustainability, and rural development. The Irish National Chapter aims to ignite youth passion for Ireland's food future and equip young leaders with the tools and network to shape it. We also aim to create opportunities for young people to engage in dialogue, share ideas, and contribute to shaping the future of food and farming. And I'm now going to hand over to Athene to introduce the UK National Chapter.
Hi, I'm Athena, and I'm here to introduce the UK Youth Food and Farming Forum. So while the Irish chapter is doing brilliant work in the Irish context, our focus is specifically on the UK, particularly creating space for young people to engage with UK policy and decision making. At the heart of what we do is a simple belief, which is that young people shouldn't just be spoken about in conversation on food and farming, but recognised as active participants in shaping what comes next. And with that in mind, I'm now going to hand over to Niamh to talk about why new entrants are so important to the future of farming in rural communities and introduce our speakers.
And just to note, if anything you heard this evening sparks your interest about either of the national chapters and you want to get involved, please don't hesitate to reach out. But turning our attention to the theme of the webinar tonight, so focusing on new entrants in farming. And when we talk about new entrants in farming, we're not just referring to farm succession or the next generation taking over the family farm. We're also talking about people entering farming from a non-traditional route, so individuals who maybe don't have access to a family farm. And attracting new entrants is critical if we want a vibrant and resilient future to farming, both in Ireland and the UK. So we are fortunate tonight to be joined by four excellent speakers who bring both the policy expertise but also the lived experience into life and into the discussion. So our first speaker is Professor Stephen Thomson, who is a professor of agricultural economics and policy at Scotland's Rural College. Stephen has over 30 years experience in agricultural policy analysis and rural development research, and he's heavily involved in supporting the Scottish Government in the design of future agricultural policy. Our second speaker tonight is Dr. Emma Dillon, who works at Teagasc and is an economist and is also heavily involved in Teagasc's National Farm Survey. Emma's work focuses on structural and behaviour change within agriculture, farm level modelling and policy evaluation. And then we're also joined by Karina Rosengrave, who is a full-time farmer from County Clare, and she entered dairy farming 7 years ago through a formal farm partnership and now manages a successful dairy and pedigree suckler enterprise. And Karina is also Ireland's Woman Farmer Ambassador for the International Year of the Woman Farmer, which is 2026. And last but by no means least, we're joined by Jack Munro, who is a skip generation new entrant tenant farmer establishing a commercial beef and sheep enterprise. And Jack is building a business focus on high quality local produce while improving productivity, natural capital, and the sustainability of the land he farms. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm now going to hand over to Stephen to give us an overview of the policy landscape in Scotland. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Stephen, you're still on mute.
Sorry, as soon as I share my screen, I disappear. I couldn't find my mute button. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks very much for the invite today. I'm Stephen, and I was born in a hotel, come from a farming village, and worked on farms in my informative years, and have since then worked for the Agricultural College in Scotland, where most of my work is related to agricultural policy, whether that's informing it through data analysis or trying to inform improvements in terms of its design, etc., within the government. So I thought I would skip through today what some of the key points are with regards to agricultural support, except my screen doesn't want to move on. And what we have to remember is that Scotland, potentially unlike Ireland or Republic of Ireland, is hugely covered by what we classify as rough grazing. There are different types of rough grazing, but in Scotland, we're talking about 52% of the land mass is rough grazing. And if you look at it in parts of Scotland, Highlands and Islands region, where it's all pink in the image, that's all rough grazing land. So people that are working in those areas, and if you're a new entrant trying to work in those areas, you have very limited choices as to what you can produce. Most of it's to do with sheep and cattle. That's the kind of standard stock that you can do. If you move towards the east and the yellow and browns in the map, that's where our prime agricultural land is and our grazing lands. And of course, as soon as you move into those areas, then you're talking about very high land values, and those land values are a huge barrier to entry. So Scotland has also got a massive variation in the size of businesses. So if you, and this is why you should never look at averages or even the median in terms of sizes. So you can see there the average size according to the June census in 2019 was 210 hectares of agricultural units, businesses. But you can see that the maximum there was nearly 60,000 hectares. The 95th percentile, so 5%, are higher than 673 hectares. And you can see the number of cattle and sheep. 5% of less than of the businesses with cattle have got less than 3 cattle. 5% of less than 5 sheep, of those with sheep. And the biggest one with sheep was over 30,000 sheep. And this is the real challenge that agricultural policy has, is it's trying to deliver support across huge variations in terms of populations. And quite often the new entrant, if it's an absolute new entrant, rather a new blood entrant rather than a successor, they will be at that smaller end of the scale, because it takes time to build up the capital in order to grow farms and grow the business structures. Agricultural policy is, I daren't say evolving. It's changing, but very, very slowly in Scotland. We're in a period, and we have been in a period of what was classified as stability and simplicity from 2017 to 2024. And that was a promise that farmers and crofters in Scotland would have a period of stable policy that would be simplified in terms of reducing the inspection regime that the EU had installed. We're now in another period of stability until 2030 because policy hasn't evolved as fast as everybody thought it could and should. And we're stuck in this position of we are still using the 2014 to 2022 CAP infrastructure. There have been some changes, and the rhetoric is that farmers must deliver more public good for public money. But what quite often policymakers won't discuss is the fact that they discuss the red line, which is the amount of agricultural support money it's stuck at. Direct support is roughly 520, 530 million quid going into Scottish farming. in real buying power, when you actually take out the inflationary effects, we're if you went back to 2003, that was up at 900 and something million pounds worth of goods and services that it could have bought. Nowadays, we're now below 400 million. So that real buying power that the government has got over farmers has decreased significantly. Yet the rhetoric is farmers need to deliver more for their money. New and young entrant support in Scotland is incredibly limited. In the initial period of the 14 to 22 cap, we had a new entrant scheme, a capital grant scheme. Saw quite a lot of new entrants come in. Some of that was succession, some of it was absolute new blood coming in, and we saw those grants going out and actually stimulating change within the system. And I'll show you how that's affected the figures. The only real support that's available just now is the continuation of the BPS Young Farmer Uplift. That's 25% of average entitlement values up to 90 hectares. But Scotland has also now got a national reserve free entitlement allocation. So if you are a young farmer or a new entrant, you can apply, providing you meet the conditions. You can apply to the government and get entitlements allocated to you, so you don't have to go into the marketplace and buy them or lease them from someone. I was just asked somebody from the department, and this year there was 138 young farmers and 177 new entrant applications for the SAF window that's just been completed. And there is no limits in size. So if you're a very large new entrant or a very large young farmer that's not got entitlement, you're entitled to apply, providing you meet the criteria. We are still stuck with our regional support system. Challenges with Scotland is that we've got really good land, really high quality land, which is the best quality land is Region 1. So it's arable and temporary grassland, really. And then we've got pretty rubbish land, which is mostly rough grazing. And that's split into Region 2, which was historically highly stocked or higher stocking density, and Region 3, which was very lowly stocked land. And the reason that the payment rates are so differentiated is to stop money flowing to vast tracts of nothingness where there's very limited agricultural activity going on. And you can see the levels of payments there. For Region 1, 220 odd quid a hectare. For Region 3, rough grazing areas, it's nearly £14 a hectare. Significant differences. We also have maintained coupled support payments on calves. And that is roughly was about 110, 111 quid in 2024 and 155 quid for the islands, and we differentiate between islands and mainland to reflect the additional costs of production, haulage costs for getting animals on and off islands, and also for feed and fertilizers, etc. In 2025, you see a big jump in the payment rate, and that's because there's been a 410-day calving interval on the dams of calves introduced as a condition. So in order to try and improve productivity or try and stimulate productivity improvements, the government introduced this condition. That has meant that probably 15% less calves have been claimed or are eligible, which has bumped the payment rates up for everyone else. So those that are performing well have seen uplifts in their payments. Those that are performing poorly in terms of calving intervals have seen a decline. We've also got a coupled sheep payment, roughly 65 quid per ewe hog, and it's only available on the poorest quality land. And there are certain criteria that go alongside it so that, again, the very largest don't benefit from it, and those with lots of good quality land don't benefit from it. Scotland also has LFA support, and a trick that somebody within the department told me for new entrants was, whatever you do, do not claim LFA support until you're at your optimum stocking level or very near to it. Because if you come in and you've got a few sheep or a few cows in your first couple of years and you claim LFA, you're frozen at those levels. And this is one of the real bugbears of the industry against Scottish Government, is we're essentially frozen at 2010 livestock value or livestock numbers determining how much people get paid in that scheme. This is a bit busy, but this is the entirety of the payments that go to those businesses that receive young farmer payments, the young farmer uplift in the BPS. And you can see the young farmer payment, there's roughly like 1,100, just over 1,000 in 2015. That's dropped to about 450. And the reason it's dropped is because the capital grants are no longer there to stimulate the intergenerational change that we saw in 2015, 16, 17, 18, before the scheme was kind of scrapped. So though that legacy of the capital grants is apparent in this set of figures. And then we're left with a churn of, as I said, there's 300 new applications for entitlements, 315 for this year. And you can see that we often think about just the young farmer payment as the support for young farmers. But when you look at the total payments going in, it was up at over 33 million in 2019. It's now down at just over 9 million in terms of total payments going to those businesses, those 450 businesses that are receiving young farmer support. There are significant barriers, and this will be the same in Ireland. I'm sure Emma will touch on it, in that the barriers to entry remain huge particularly for new blood entrants. Land values don't really reflect the agronomic value of land. We've seen the green lairds coming in, buying up tracts of Scotland for rewilding, for peatland restoration, for carbon credits, for woodland planting, etc. But quite often not for farming. And that has led to an awful lot of tensions between the farming industry and also the sort of wider landowning industries. And you can see the average values per hectare there. You need to have pretty deep pockets if you're going to come in and buy a 20 hectare, 50 hectare, 100 hectare farm in Scotland, as you would in Ireland as well. And the part of the reason for that is the turnover in land is incredibly small, incredibly slow. So we talk about like 1.5%, 2% of land, if that. So it takes 50 years on average, 75 years on average, for a piece of land to come onto the market. And that in itself stymies new entrants. And the other problem we have is for years we've had tenancy issues in terms of landowners having a fear of an absolute right to purchase. And I just hope and wish at some point we'll look at the tax breaks that others have made in order to stimulate leasing of land to new entrants and young farmers, because fiscal breaks is about the only thing I think that will actually stimulate that market. The other barriers to entry are increasing, unfortunately. So, 20 years ago, cattle prices and sheep prices were pretty low in relative terms. Now, if you're a new entrant, you're trying to buy breeding stock, you're paying through the nose for them. So that's an additional expense over and above land and getting into a tenancy or whatever form of agreement that you have. So if you're trying to start from new, it is really expensive. Machinery we now know is really expensive. It's accelerated way beyond inflation. And we know that there's huge swings in cost of production, mostly related to geopolitics. And you can see that with the fertilizer and energy price spikes from 2001 till the recent ones just now. All of these make it really difficult and make it a very difficult decision for people to enter into this industry. And more needs to be done to try and smooth that transition for them. Future support for agriculture in Scotland is based on a BPS type thing in tier 1, where it's universal, everybody can apply for it. Enhanced is like greening schemes where there is some conditionality on it, environmental conditionality. Elective is similar to higher tier or higher targeted competitive agri-environment climate schemes. And complementary is to do with things like continuing professional development, the monitor farms, knowledge exchange, etc. Scotland's introduced some changes. As of 2025, everyone must do 2 elements of a whole farm plan every year. That is an animal health and welfare plan. If you've got animals, you must do it each year. You must do a carbon plan, 1 in 5 years, a habitats report, 1 in 5 years, an integrated pest management plan, which isn't really an integrated pest management plan. It's an online questionnaire that you can do in lieu of that, which takes 20 minutes. And soil testing and a soil report, which has to be completed 1 in 5 years. And in 2028, they're going to introduce nutrient management plans. And this is all fine for very large businesses, because very large businesses are largely doing these things and possibly should be doing these things. But when you're dealing with very small businesses, of which new entrants quite often are them, or small crofts with common grazings, then some of these things possibly don't make so much sense. And what we've seen is a faster dropout rate from the system due to that, because of the additional costs of having to do that. So we're seeing an acceleration of people leaving the support mechanisms. We have mirrored the European Union with a new peatland geek. We have new calving interval eligibility criteria that I've talked about. In 26 this year, we're introducing a derogation for the smallest herd. So that is good news on the calving interval front for any new entrants with less than 10 animals that they're going to be claiming. In the Tier 2 greening, we have now dropped the derogations that used to exist for Europe, which were to do with temporary grassland and grassland, total land area under grass, which now means anybody with more than 15 hectares of crop and temporary grassland have to do 5% ecological focus area. That's potentially, I'm not 100% sure yet, increasing to 7% in 2027. And that's led to quite a lot of head scratching for some within the industry that are grassland dominated, because they think that they're not getting recognition that grazing regimes play in terms of habitats, etc. Finally, the government have got lots of other things that are ongoing. There's a small producer pilot scheme which can produce some capital grants for small producers. Small in this terms is under 30 hectares or under 2 million turnover and 15 FTEs. So you can see that it's actually also earmarked at processors, etc. But the small capital grants is aimed to stimulate support for small scale food production. There's a land-based apprenticeship program that's been launched, and there's a next generation practical training front, which is to encourage people and prospective tenants to get uptake training, practical training courses in Scotland. There's the Farming Opportunities New Entrant Group, which had stimulated some public land coming available for new entrants. So there was these starter farm units. The problem with starter farm units is once you've got a tenant in them, there's very few opportunities for them to move on to. So that's led to real challenges for that scheme. The Scottish Land Matching Service is funded by the Scottish Government to help people that want to access land with those that have got land to access. And then there's things like the Crofting House Grant, which is still available for people that meet the criteria, where they can get up to 40 grand to help with the building costs of a house or a renovation costs of a house. And for those really wanting to get into land management, the Crofting Commission is actively trying to tackle absenteeism, which should essentially make some crofts available. And I will just acknowledge that most of my funding comes via the Scottish Government.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a really good oversight into the Scottish policy landscape. I think one point that really stood out was the challenge of ensuring that policy kind of both supports renewal within the sector, but also maintains a viable farm business, which I think is a challenge everywhere at the moment. So with that, I'm now going to turn to Emma to give us an overview of the Irish policy landscape.
Thanks, Niamh. Okay, so I need to, Stephen, could you stop sharing there and I can...
I'll try, Emma.
Excellent.
Where
Okay,
is the
great.
stop sharing on this?
Yeah, perfect.
Have you got it?
It's done.
All right,
Yeah,
good.
done. Yeah.
I need to go on a new course to remind myself how to use this.
No, not at all. My PowerPoint has disappeared, so maybe I need a course too. Let's see. I'll try this again. I'll just do the entire screen maybe, and that might work. We tried this earlier and it worked, but now it's decided not to. So let's see. Go back here. Can you guys see the presentation or?
You can see it in, yeah, it's in full screen now. Yeah.
Good. Okay, great. Excellent. So thanks very much for the invitation to join the webinar, and well done for putting it together. So we heard some really interesting insights from Stephen there, and it struck me at the outset that yes, structurally there are large differences in terms of scale and land type, I guess, for the most part between Ireland and Scotland. But the challenge of creating a policy to improve generational renewal across different types of farms, I think is a common theme between the two countries. I'll touch on that a little as I go on. Okay, I won't dwell too long on this, but just to say, what do we mean by generational renewal? And Stephen and Niamh have both discussed the fact that it's both young farmers taking over, but also new entrants and taking over from the older generation in running and owning farms. And obviously, we know there are lots of challenges around that at both ends of the spectrum. We need to think about it as a process rather than a single event. And I think that will then take the fear out of it a little bit. And that's one lesson I think that we can have and provide to policymakers in terms of making policy that fits for particular family and farm contexts. So generational renewal has emerged as a critical challenge, as we know, across the EU, despite targeted schemes for young farmers. And I think that is important to say that there are some very positive policy initiatives that have been introduced, particularly in the current CAP, but there is still a challenge there and a lack of uptake across some of these schemes. And so that raises concerns then, as Niamh raised earlier, around the long-term sustainability and competitiveness of agriculture and our capacity to meet climate targets. Okay, so what does the data say? In Ireland, we are in line with the EU average, and that is that the average farmholder age is 57 years, with 33% of farm holders aged above 65 and 12% less than 40. So those numbers are cited quite a lot. And sometimes there is a discussion around the invisible labour on farms and the fact that young people may be involved, but they're not potentially farm holders. We're doing some work on this at the moment in the National Farm Survey, and it's throwing up some interesting results. And we are seeing a decline in the labour input of young people on cattle farms, but an increase on dairy farms. And so some of that work will be coming out in the next few weeks when we publish our National Farm Survey report. Just to say also that obviously there are some countries in an EU context that are doing better in terms of this demographic profile, but there are lots of reasons for that. And Austria jumps out there, and we know that other gainful activity and part-time farming and some of these factors, the role of women, these are drivers in Austria. And so the context-specific nature of the challenge really needs to be borne in mind, and also is something for national governments to take account of in their iteration of the next CAP or former CSP. Stopped. Oh, here we are. Okay, so what does the data tell us? Here we have some data from the CSO, the Census of Agriculture, and the Farm Structure Survey over recent years. I won't dwell on the numbers, but just to say that the green colours and blue are showing a decline across the last number of decades. And these are across the younger age cohorts, again, of farm holders, and an increase then in the older age categories. I think these maps are quite stark, and it shows the difference between 1991 and 2020 in terms of the census data. And so the darkening in the colour shows the increase in the proportion of farm holders aged over 65 on a regional basis on the left-hand side in the red maps. And then on the green, it shows the proportion of farm holders aged under 35. And this is lightening over the period, so there are less of them, as you'd expect. But I think it's quite stark when you see it there on a regional basis. Okay, so we've begun to explore some of this demographic data within the National Farm Survey in the last number of years. And the number that often gets quoted is this average farmer aged, which is now close to 60, with 34% aged above 60. Interestingly, Stephen talked about barriers to entry for new farmers, new entrants and young farmers. And we know that the cost of land and the very small proportion of land that changes hands is certainly a factor. We asked the question within the survey in the last number of years as to how long the main farm operator had been in control on the farm. And we saw that 74% had been in control or managerial control for over 20 years. And I think that really highlights the challenge we have around delayed succession. When farmers were asked as to whether or not they had identified a successor, 6 in 10 farmers said that they had, but we don't have any insight really as to the presence of succession plannings or formal planning around that. I'm not going to dwell too long on the research, but we know that there's a lot of research undertaken in recent years in this area. And I see that Brian Leonard is on the call and he has written extensively around this. So this twofold challenge for new entrants and also existing farmers, issues for the new entrant around access to land and finance, as we have discussed, and for existing farmers around long-term retirement income and concerns around healthcare, etc. More recent work that we've been doing within Teagasc with my colleague Jason Lockery and others has highlighted the importance of economic and social drivers and the farm system differences that are there. And in a recent paper, the issue of farm succession being less of an issue on some part-time operations is quite interesting. And again, Holly Mullen in her PhD research, which is just completed, she conducted qualitative research, in-depth interviews with potential successors north and south of the border. And she found that the role of life stage and shared values and identity were really important. So lots of young people are interested in farming at some point in their lives, but they may be established in careers, they may have other commitments as regards family. So some of these things are drivers in delaying the overall succession process. Sorry now, just somebody's, I just interrupted here for a moment. Sorry.
Okay, we might move on to Karina onto the oh.
Sorry, guys, the difficulty in working from home.
You're fine.
Okay, we'll go again. Just somebody called there to the door, which is okay. Right. Where was I? Okay, so can you see my screen?
No, we can't.
No. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I'm not going to dwell too much longer on this now. Yeah, so it emphasizes really this role for a tailored policy approach, and that's collaborative farming initiatives can be very useful in some cases. Okay, Stephen gave us a good overview of existing supports in a Scottish context. I'm going to direct you to the Commission on Generational Renewal report that I'm going to talk about in a moment, but that gives a really good oversight of existing supports, the main mechanisms that are in place in an Irish context, and we know the success of the National Reserve and the TAMS grants for young farmers. We also know there's taxation reliefs in place and also collaborative farming grants, which are useful in some circumstances. But we know that the uptake of some of these options is quite low, and that awareness and family support is really crucial in improving that. We know that there are ongoing activities around education and advisory, and of course, targeted loan schemes. But as I said, some limited demographic impact so far. Okay, so to briefly mention the Commission on Generational Renewal, in farming in Ireland, and I see that our chair, Aidan O'Driscoll, is also on the call. The commission was established by the minister in late 2024 with the objective of examining the evidence. So what are the factors that are delaying the whole process of succession, the legal, economic, social and administrative factors that are driving this age profile that we have? And as part of the commission, there was a public consultation with stakeholders, and the report was published in September 2025. I would advise you to take a look at it because it's really comprehensive and we learned lots from the stakeholders that we talked to in the process. There is an implementation group now in place within the department, and the minister is considering the recommendations made by the commission. Very briefly, what did we learn in terms of the commission and from the research that we've undertaken in recent years? As Niamh mentioned, we know that succession drives innovation. Interestingly, we are undertaking a literature review currently as part of the DAFM-funded Gen Farms project, and it's highlighting to us that yes, younger farmers tend to adopt new technologies, and their farms tend to be more viable and more sustainable, but the capacity to innovate is really important. So access to education, access to peer groups, and that support network. The barriers persist. We know this in terms of inadequate pensions for the incumbent farmer and the lack of successor in some instances. We know that family dynamics are really important, and that context-specific nature of the challenge is something that really does need to be emphasised. I'm not going to highlight much more on this slide, but just to say that the attractiveness of the non-farm economy has also been particularly striking in an Irish context, I would say, in the last number of years. And also, not only from an economic point of view, but the work-life balance issues that are there. So we may have a viability issue on some types of farms, but on the flip side, a workload and work-life balance challenge in others. The Commission on Generation Renewal provided 31 recommendations to the Minister. These are the areas in which they were targeted. Common agricultural policy changes for the next CAP. We know that there will be challenges there around that, particularly in terms of the budget available at a national level. Again, I will direct you to the report to look at these in detail, but there are recommendations around the next CAP, around the implementation of installation aid for young farmers in an Irish context. We're the only member state that does not currently have that. Also, the importance of retaining existing tax supports was emphasised, and also to expand those in some circumstances. There was some discussion around pensions and the challenges that are there for the incumbent farmer. Access to finance, really important, access to land. These are all of the issues that come up all of the time. Collaborative arrangements are really important in some instances, and they can be a good fit in some farm circumstances. So there is a real need there to reduce the administrative burdens and to normalise these arrangements, and I think to make farmers aware of them. So I've been to a lot of Teagasc events recently where we have seen success stories being talked about, and I think that's really important because I think succession is being discussed more in recent years in families and across villages, across communities. And I think that's important because it's not just something that a particular family is challenged by. It's a widespread issue. Also, improvements and expansions in terms of some of the support services available by advisory, and also education and training. And that is, again, going back to the capacity to innovate, the importance of having CPD and training options there for potential successors who may not have been involved on the farm to a great degree over recent years is probably important to say also. And of course, the need to encourage gender balance and to improve the overall attractiveness of the sector. I think what I would say though is the challenge around part-time, full-time and different types of farm systems is one that really does need to be borne in mind. And that's why a very tailored and bespoke approach is needed across farm systems and across even farm families. So I think there's a lot of discussion in advisory circles about how best to encourage and support families on that journey. I'd just like to acknowledge the funding that we've received from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine at the moment on the Gen Farms project, which I'm working on with Brian, who's also on the call. That's really interesting. We're finding some really interesting insights from our engagement with women and young farmers around the challenges that are there. Apologies for the interruption earlier, so I hope that was clear enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. That was a really good overview as well of the Irish sector and what the policies that are in place at the moment, and an overview. And I think as well what you said about Holly Mullins, some of her findings from her PhD, I suppose it does kind of highlight that these policies are designed as kind of a one size fits all, but actually every family and every farming family does have different, I suppose, personal circumstances, which also need to be acknowledged. So thank you, Emma and Stephen. That's a brilliant overview of the policy perspective, but I suppose it only tells one side of the coin. And we're now going to hear from two farmers that I suppose experience and have so it's a vast experience of the policies on the ground. So the first farmer we're going to hear from is Karina Rosengrave, who is Ireland's female ambassador for the International Year of the Woman Farmer. So Karina, you entered farming through, I suppose, a unconventional pathway. And it's obviously very aspiring for young people, especially young women in the sector. So can you just tell us a little bit about your journey into farming and what are the barriers you faced and maybe some policies that supported you as well?
So hi everyone, and thanks very much for having me on the Zoom call today. My name is Karina Rosegrave and I farm alongside my brother Jerry in a mixed enterprise in the west of Ireland in County Clare. So we farm beef, dairy, free-range eggs, and also have a pedigree herd of limousines and Charleys. So we would have originally just been a generational suckler farm. My mum and dad would have farmed sucklers and beef and finished the cattle. In 2002, my dad would have passed away and my mum would have been full-time working in Clare Marts, which would be the local mart to us. She wanted the farm to survive, so she continued with her job, but also held on to the farm. So when myself and my brother were old enough, we took over the farm at about 16 years of age, and we worked away the farm as a suckler farm. And about 7-8 years ago, a block of land came available for sale. It was our neighbour that was selling it, and he came to us. If the land had gone up for public auction, I wouldn't be on this call today because it would have been out of reach. A block of 127 acres came up with 70 acres of woodland, which were involved in the acre scheme. And the other block is 57 acres where we started our dairy enterprise. Now, bear in mind, I had never stepped foot in a parlour. It was sucklers is all I knew. But I had the passion for animals. I had the passion for farming. And my brother had done a year in New Zealand milking cows and driving machinery. So we took on board the challenge and we started off with 28 heifers in the parlour, and now we're milking a herd of 100 cows. Now, by all means, it is long hours. The two of us are in it together. If you were to do it now, to become a new entrant into dairy, land prices have increased 3 times from what we had bought the land at, and that would be a barrier for any young person today. But we're there, and it has the highs and lows of it. But I suppose for young people entering, there is so many different things to consider. Your cash flow, it's up and down. As I often say, farming is the greatest form of gambling because you don't know what you're going to get in that milkshake. You don't know. So with the diversification on our farm, with having the beef to be able to sell at the end of the fall, we have the stability of that money coming in. And also 3 years ago, I got into free range eggs, which they lay 365 days of the year. I have control over my product that goes out and I put my price on it. So the free range eggs are probably the most stable income that comes into the farm. And it's only 3 years in the making, and it's thanks to the Acorns programme that is Department of Agriculture funded and ran by Paul Fitzsimons is how I started my free range eggs business. The biggest barriers, as I already spoke about, for any young person is access to land. The problem is anyone that is already there farming the land is afraid to hand it over to the next generation, because what I find is, from talking to elderly farmers, they're afraid they're going to be forgotten. And I think that's the biggest thing there, that they're not going to have a worth after 60 years farming the land that was passed on from their generation. And I think it's important for us as young people to sit down with that generation of people and still involve them when you're taking over the farm. Because my mum, she handed over the farm to us at a very young age. She said, have at it, kind of, and she was happy to do so. But my mum is still involved in the farm there during the springtime when it's so busy and everyone's wrecked. She'll go up and check them cows at 2 o'clock in the night just to make sure that they're okay. Or she'll feed that weak calf, and she's still involved in a small scale. And as we call her, the hobby farmer now, but she's still involved, and it has made the transition between myself and Jerry taking on the family farm and also making our own stamp with our own land that we've bought. It just has made it smoother, but it came from sitting down at that kitchen table and having the conversation. The other thing is, a lot of young people don't want to take on the family farm because they could be involved in a job that is paid every Friday. They know what they're getting involved. They know what the income is every single day of the week. They know that they can go to the bank and get a mortgage. Farming, it's very hard to get a mortgage for a house and start a family. So there has to be some sort of support put in there for young farmers to encourage them. It's not that they don't want to be involved in farming. It's just financially, it's not viable really for them to do it. We're okay because we got into it at the lower end when land was cheaper, and we've diversified to make sure our farm is stable. But a lot of farms wouldn't be as scaled as ours, and also they're afraid to diversify into different things. So my advice to any young farmer out there is, if you are a dairy farmer, it doesn't mean that you can't have tillage on the side, that you can't have free range eggs, that you can't have, an extra enterprise on your land. It is the way to make yourself viable and also to be on the land. And my thing is as well, we're probably 2 or 3 generations lost because the generations before us had such a hard life and a lot of negativity was spoken about. And I think it's up to us now as younger people to go back into the schools and educate kids about where milk comes from, where the egg comes from, where your beef comes from, and put out positivity back to the generations that will be the future of Ireland, Scotland, UK, that we need to be positive about it. But we probably will need the likes of the EU and the CAP reform to support us to be able to do that. How it was possible for me to do what we did was because I had the support of my brother and the support of my mum. And one of the big thing is, if you don't have the support from your family when you're trying to take on a new project like that, it is very hard. What I found as my role as the ambassador for women is that a lot of people are afraid to start families because there is no such thing as maternity leave when you're a woman. You kind of have the child, you get on with it, and there is no way to get an extra income. That woman could be working 365 days on the farm before she has the child and then has to replace herself. So that is an issue that maybe something can be looked at, that there could be. They are doing it in some countries at the moment, maybe Denmark, I think, that they have a maternity scheme for women. And that too would encourage women to get into farming and be more involved as well. But my advice to anyone on this call or anyone out there that is interested in farming, it is the best way of life. None of us would do anything different. I certainly wouldn't work a 9-to-5 job because I wouldn't have the freedom. I wouldn't be out amongst the cows and the hens and everything. And it is a great way to bring up kids, and it's just for us for the future. If you have the passion, do it. Don't let anyone stop you. There will be negativity, but there is so many positive stories out there. And I think it's mindset for any of us to continue. And for succession, the key for me is sit down at that table and have the conversation and keep the people that minded the land before us involved in order for us that we have a future in farming.
Thanks, Karina. That's very inspiring. And I think it also links back to what Emma said about that it is actually inheritance and succession is a process. It's not a once-off event, that you do have the conversation and you bring on the older generation with you. And I don't know, does that process have a set deadline? Maybe it's over a good few years, but no, thanks. That was really, really insightful. I want to bring in Jack now, because Jack is a skip generation new entrant tenant farmer. And yeah, Jack, please tell us a little bit about your own story of how you got into farming, and I suppose some of the barriers that you encountered.
Super, thank you. That was really inspiring, Karina. How you got on the farming ladder. Can everyone see my screen? It says it's sharing, but I just realised it's not on slideshow.
Not in PowerPoint mode.
Perfect, lovely, super. So I'm Jack Monroe. I am a full-time consultant. I work for Savills. I previously worked for SEC Consulting, and I live in Fife in Scotland, and I'm also here part of the UK Food and Farming Forum, which we helped set up, and it's lovely to be asked to speak here today. I myself and my wife Laura, we started our farm business last year in nearly January 2025. And you can see our boys here with their cousin. We've got two boys, and this is their cousin. And we started the farm because we wanted to do it as a family. It's always been my dream. But Laura, my wife, doesn't come from any farming background, and I had no farm to inherit. So we have had a very unconventional way kind of into the industry, and our unit now, as you'll see, is we're a mixed unit. We've got a bit of arable, we've got 62 acres of spring barley, and we've got some temporary grass, and now we're at a total area just under 250 hectares in just over a year of ground we're farming, and we've got easy to care sheep and Angus beef cows, and we've also got a forage enterprise. So you say, how do we do this? How do we get going? Well, it all started, I suppose I was advertised as a skip generation farmer, and that's true. My grandparents farmed, my uncle farmed, my mother didn't, and there was never going to be a farm for me to take on. But at 14, working with my neighbour, I set the bug of farming, and I've always wanted to farm myself. But again, like many others, have been told, oh, it's impossible. You need lots of money. You need to marry into farming. You need to inherit one, and that was what I was pushed down. But I went and did a degree through SRUC, University of Glasgow, and I did agriculture and business, and then the masters, and then I started working in consultancy, and from there I really started networking. And because I was advising farmers about grants, about farming systems, grassland management, stock enterprises, it kind of felt natural. Well, if I'm advising on these things, surely we can put them into practice ourselves. I had a gap for 2 years where I did farm management on a mixed dairy farm, and that really helped also to cement some of these kind of practical skills. And then while I was a student, I'd kind of farmed in the Scotland and in Wales, but also in Iowa and Botswana. And I suppose these collective experience give you the confidence. And so I suppose if anyone's not wants to get into farming, you need to get practical experience working on farms first to see what it is you enjoy, what element of farming. There's so many different avenues. Karina's talked about hens, dairy, beef. There's lots of different ways to get in. But how do we get in? Well, Stephen's mentioned some of these policies already, and we started our farming journey through Forestry Land Scotland. This year we were successful in gaining just under 100 acres of arable ground, and previous to that, we actually just applied for a 50-acre tenancy that was just advertised online in my locality. And we were successful in bidding that. So this was our first unit here in through West Fife, and this is what got us going. But it was by no means a lovely place. I think I've got a picture here. You know, when you imagine your first farm and you think, wow, you know, we'll have lush fields, we'll have buildings, this is what we got. And how do you make that work? You know, so it's well, a bit of graft, a bit of work, a bit of consultancy. This was after we just motivated it, and we get Lyman reseeding plan, but and then we get some stock. So Karina was mentioning the biggest barrier is access to land, and I would say that is still the case. Land isn't promoted very well, and again, for all these reasons we've mentioned about inheritance tax, etc., there is a reason why there hasn't been so much land on the market. But there is ground out there, and there are many older people that have land that don't have any successor that would be keen to take on a young person. So I say that in my role as a consultant, we deal with a lot of clients, and that if there is somebody that does have a farming skill set, there is opportunity for them to farm, whether that be in a share farming or a contract farming opportunity, or even having the farm leased. But I've other wee bits of ground that just through the network I've built up, that because we were starting the farming business, that we took on some leases with family and friends, and they were good to us and given some better kind of grazing to get going. So this was our IX for this year, and I just say that we're trying to capitalise on all the payments. So the 90 hectare, as Stephen pointed out, in Scotland is where you get the 25% top up. So we thought, well, that's the opportunity to claim. So so we're just under that in our effective area. So yeah, we've gone down a system which works for us as a family. I'm with my day job. I'm more than 9 to 5, but the farm's got to fit around our life. So we have easy cares. So we started off with some gimmers, and bought kind of signet recorded genetics, and we all outlambed, outwintered, and it's been not a bad winter, I have to say, and I've only had to lamb one ewe this winter from their little block. So have a breed that suits the system, and we've grown a bit more grass now, and we had a forage enterprise last year, so we sold just under 200 tons of haylage. So this is all kind of helping us kind of get going on our ladder, and we used our network of my friends and other contractors to help this. We've a tiny herd of Angus crosses, and we want to build on this, but again, capitalising on some of the support Stephen was talking about to help get going, but also working very closely with our bank. As a consultant, we did a business plan for everything, and so we're waiting for the first calves to drop this June. So Stephen's mentioned some of these grants, so I won't really touch on it, and I just want to give an example of them in our context on 90 hectares. What could be claimed, and I mean these numbers are, I suppose, unique to in my business, but any farm that would be doing a mixed enterprise that we could have applied for this year. So just to give that an example, with our basic payments, plus the young farmer top ups, with our suckler beef support scheme, which we obviously haven't had yet, but we anticipate, and LFAS, and we've had these other grants, and so you can see that actually, and I won't go through all the schemes, but there are grants out there, and some of them are easily to apply for, some of them are a bit more work, but they can help you get going in your farming journey. We've tried to do this without putting in as much saving, at least a little bit of savings as we can, and make the business work itself, and not have to be relying on our salaries. And actually in Scotland, I would say that whilst it's still tricky to get going, there are supports there. You just need to have the confidence and have support around you that you can tap into these grants. Stephen's mentioned some of them, and I just bring up some of the LFAS payments, for example. Again, everything helps top things up, and so because of that, that's a big cash injection we can have, and allows for do the improvements that we need. In my role as a consultant, and grassland management is key. So how do we make the business profitable? It's making the most from grass, and that's what we're trying to do. So this is the grass we're looking at the minute. So hopefully we'll get our first cut next week. So we got started because of having a really good network, a lot of people encouraging us, and we as colleagues and friends in a wider the farming network, and also, I don't know how it works in Ireland, but certainly in Scotland, the way there's a lot of cooperative working and sharing of machinery, and we call them contra deals. And as a consultant, I hate it, but as a farmer, I love it. So if somebody helps me out at lambing, well, I can help them out with maybe a bale or two. And this is also, I say leveraging the network, but it's more working together with neighbours, and that's another way that we can get started on the farm in January. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of work in terms of keeping all these relationships up and making sure that you're doing all the paperwork right. It's not just let's do this at a whim. It takes a lot of careful planning, but you've got to take the leap at some point, and you might find that actually you're more prepared than you think you are. The other thing I think is key for just getting started is like what you need to have a clear goal of what you want, and sometimes that goal might need to be adjusted. We will want to grow an enterprise that can kind of exist on itself. And the other big barrier that in addition to access to land, as Karina has mentioned, is actually finance. How does the farm pay for itself? And we all know working with smaller numbers is really difficult, and we're all seeing high input costs. And whilst certainly in Scotland we've seen really good prices for our lamb and beef until recently, we need to make sure the farm washes its face. And so we've set a goal of how many ewes and cows we would realistically run without being too optimistic, and then how we're going to do that. And so I've just outlined some of the other things there that we're looking to do as well. But I'm conscious of time, and I really want to kind of make sure that everyone has time to have put in their comments. But one of the things which I am very keen is that, and I would say to any kind of aspiring new entrant, is that there are grant supports within your country. Sometimes they're local grants. They're not really might not come under the banner of rural, but there's still business grants that can be applied for. There's support schemes there. So make sure you're using a consultant, and we've got various organisations in the UK that can help as well and advise. And also do your own research. There is support there that can help you get on the ladder. But it's one thing getting on; it's now making it work. So making it pay. So that's the challenge we've got of just now. But I'll just leave that slide there, and I'll just stop sharing. But that's a flying visit through Monroe Farms at the minute of where we are. So how do I stop sharing? Stop share. There we go.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack, for the overview. And yeah, I think one of the things that yourself and Karina both mentioned, and it shouldn't be overlooked, is your support networks. And I suppose it's your family, but then also, as you mentioned, it's your neighbours and the village around you as well. That it's not a one-person show. I don't think it would be possible for one person on their own, especially to get established. So I know that kind of falls outside the policy remit, but it is obviously important. If everyone could, if you have questions or feedback, you can put it into the chat or just come off mute. But actually in the chat, there's just something really interesting about the Swiss model. I don't know if Stephen or Emma want to come in just to give a brief overview, if you feel confident, because it seems to be an approach that's interesting, something that's being flagged at European level.
Stephen, do you want to go ahead?
Which scheme was that?
No, about the Swiss and the link to the pension.
Oh, sorry, yeah, the Swiss
discussion in the chat.
Yeah. So in Scotland, in the policy circles, there's been a lot of head scratching on this one. I'm less worried about it because, as I've said in the chat, I think most rural businesses and most urban businesses that are sole traders are relatively small. The transition to the next generation doesn't often happen until somebody's retired, and people are living and working longer, so they're working into their 70s. So I would expect the average age to increase. It's the proportion that are over 75 that we possibly have to worry about more than anything. And the Swiss model has always been interesting because I think they originally tapered after 65 to 75, and then now I was just reading there that they're now stopping payments to over 65s. So that transition away, and I've always quite liked the idea of the tapering. But as I've said in the chat, there are huge challenges associated with that because we have got such a large population of older support recipients. And as I've said in the chat, that support would, if that support's removed, then we've got a housing issue, we've got pension issues, we've got heating issues, we've got another type of crisis on our hands that we could make. So there's opportunities to look at it and think about tapering. I don't think I would ever go as far as to say cut it off at 65, but these are part of ongoing discussions.
Yeah, I agree, Stephen. I think, it's something that is potentially going to be discussed in the next iteration of the CAP as well. Politically, it brings challenges, and it's a sensitive topic for some people. And we know, in terms of the National Farm Survey, in terms of the viability analysis that we do every year, that a very large proportion of farms are being sustained by an off-farm income. Now, increasingly, that is a pension, and 1/3 of all the farms are now in receipt of a pension within the household. There was a couple of other points, Neve, I might just make. I meant to make during the presentation, and one was around the really important role of the incumbent farmer, and Brian Leonard mentioned that there in the chat, and I don't think we can emphasize that enough. And the literature is really strong on the successor effect, that having a successor identified will potentially improve investment, improve morale, and the whole positivity around the farm. But there is a role for the incumbent farmer also, in terms of the experience they have and that knowledge exchange. And we know that transition out of farming can be very challenging for some. So a partnership model where it can work is really fruitful, and speaking of the partnership arrangements, Jack mentioned it again around the problem of not having an identified successor. And increasingly, we're seeing success stories being put out there. And I think that's really important. And it comes back to what Karina said about champions and raising awareness. And she herself is a champion, and that's clear to see. And that's really important, because we need to normalize the discussion about the challenge of succession within families, and also normalize it as a career, and make it attractive as a career for young people, whatever the gender, and whether that's going to be on a part-time or full-time basis. So for me, being engaged in this research, being involved in the Commission on Generation Renewal, it all goes back to signposting people to the supports that are there, because there are some, and indeed we need to, introduce more. But certainly it's around raising awareness and having a discussion that maybe only in recent years is now being had. So I won't say any more, but just I thought it was important to make some of those small points.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a question in the chat. I know you answered it on the text, Emma, but it's a question around, do you think the current cohort of 50 or 60-year-old farmers are faced with similar challenges when they were taking over their farms?
Yeah, and I guess the point I made is that, yes, potentially, and we hear all the time about people in their 60s taking over farms. I think the added layer currently is the attractiveness of the non-farm economy. So the economic, the earning potential, but also the social, the work-life balance and the quality of life issues that are there on some farms. And again, I go back to the context-specific nature of it. The potential to run something on a part-time basis and still have the off-farm job, but the challenge that may bring in terms of your family. So Holly Mullen, as I mentioned, has completed her PhD in Ulster University, and she's going to have some papers coming out around this. That is the challenge. But what's really, I guess, encouraging is that many of the potential successors that she engaged with had shared values and identified as wanting to farm. But for some, it was down the road. So again, tailoring the supports to what people need, I think, is really important. And Jack made a point that I'm always making. Previously, people fitted their family or their lives to a farm. Now I think this generation want the farm to fit with their lives and with their families. So I think these are all really important discussions that we need to have in informing policy. And that's why it's so good to have Jack and Karina and all the others who can really give us the experience on the ground and what the challenges are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just conscious of time, so if there's no other questions or feedback or remarks, I think it's timely to wrap up. So I suppose tonight's discussion was obviously really informative, and I think it was really interesting to hear the policy side and also the on the ground experience from Karina and from Jack. And I think we highlighted the opportunities, but also the challenges facing new entrants in farming. But it should remind us that supporting new entrants isn't just about replacing the retiring farmers. We need to ensure that farming remains attractive and dynamic and resilient. And as Emma just mentioned, capable of meeting social and economic challenges in the future. Before we close, I just want to remind everyone that both the Irish National Chapter and the UK National Chapter of the World Food Forum are always keen to engage with young people interested in agriculture and food systems and sustainability. So if you would like to learn more about either chapter or hear about future events or explore opportunities to get involved, we'd be delighted to continue the conversation. My sincere thank you to Stephen, Emma, Karina and Jack for sharing your experiences and expertise. Thank you to everyone that has attended as well and joined and contributed with your questions and discussion. So yeah, I hope this conversation continues long after this webinar. It could be the catalyst that's needed, even if it's just in one farming family, it will have a good effect. So thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a lovely evening.